everyone. Welcome to the second episode of The Spectrum That Connects Us. I'm Heather. My son Pierce is 5.5 years old. He's autistic and my best friend.
Hi everyone, I'm Fallon, and welcome again. My son is 4 years old. His name is Nicholas, and he's also autistic. And actually, that's how Heather and I connected. If you listened to our first episode, that you would know that. But today we're going to be talking about. We're entitling the episode "Something's Different," and we're going to be sharing our stories about when we started to realize that something was different with each of our sons. So we'll take it from there. We're going to, like, Heather's going to share her story. I'm going to share mine. We'll probably have some questions for each other, but just want to be, like, transparent and share that experience with everybody.
Yeah. So this is just to give a little bit of context and bearing. I had mentioned Pierce is 5.5. He received his diagnosis of autism just before his 4th birthday. So trying to paint the picture or a timeline for you guys in terms of where we're going to start. This is a conversation that's going to be about really the beginning of our journeys before it even took shape as an autism journey. Pierce was probably between 15 and 18 months old when I started to become aware of differences. But what's really key for our story is that the pandemic was like really an overarching factor for us. Pierce was just 15 months when COVID hit, so everything was shut down. And I think it's definitely important to talk about that being a factor or a layer for us, because we were in this like really inherent state of isolation. And I have an older daughter. I have an older child. Some of you may know that I have an almost 10-year-old daughter. So this wasn't really my first rodeo with having an infant turn into like an early toddler, but isolation due to the pandemic is definitely part of our story. I started to notice these little differences, interestingly, probably with music and a lot of like the fun sing-along songs that if you have a little one, you know, Wheels on the Bus, Open Shut Them, you know, songs that are engaging and have some like gestures. And interestingly, music is like Pierce's love language. And so I didn't know then what I know now, but he was always really lit up by music, always really drawn to these like interactive songs that so many kids love. I mean, they're largely popular for a reason. And I started to notice that while he lit up for the music, he wasn't even trying for the gestures. He was so joyful and happy, and it was a really joyful, happy experience to share music with him. But when I really stop and think about my earliest moments of noticing a difference, and probably that's because I also had a child, Pierce is my second, so I was sort of maybe not even consciously aware, but when I do stop and reflect, that experience probably between 15, 16, 20 months was what I started to notice. So what about you?
I have a question for you. Okay. So, do you remember like feeling those things and keeping them like internal only for a bit? Because like I definitely experienced that, where it was like I had these thoughts in my brain, but I kept them to myself for some time.
I mean, absolutely. Denial is the word I assign to that, but I don't know if it's fully denial.
It's like processing, and questioning, and keeping it to yourself because like it's scary.
Yeah, and I think actually maybe denial. I experienced denial, and I know we'll talk about it as the conversations start to flow. But for me, I don't think it was denial yet at that time. I think it was more processing and trying to understand. Because I'll tell you, like at 15 to 18, 20 months, like autism wasn't on my radar. I think I didn't know a lot about it. I didn't understand autism, and so it like wasn't something I thought about. It was more just this notion of like something's different. So yes, I completely internalized. And I also think like I think that there's such an inherent connection between a mother and a child. I am not undervaluing or like devaluing anyone else's relationship, like a father's relationship, but there is something that is, I think, undebatable about
Like
a
that
mother and a
mother's
child.
instinct.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
you just know. And that's really
Mhm.
more of what it was, like an instinct. Something
Mhm.
is different.
Mhm.
It wasn't, I mean, I think I felt worried because
Mhm.
I did have an older child and I
Mhm.
kind of had assumed. I mean, also, like, milestones are widely
Yeah.
available. In
Mhm.
fact, not only are they available, but I feel like pediatricians, Instagram, social
Mhm.
media thrusts milestones on you.
Mhm.
So, you know, I think it was like less concern. Again, autism was not even part of the vernacular,
Mhm.
not part of any worry
Mhm.
that I had at that time. It's just this vivid experience of looking back and just sort of knowing
Mhm.
or or learning that something was different.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I did internalize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually have like a very different experience from Heather because Nicholas was my firstborn. Um, so I I'm gonna start from the very beginning with Nicholas. I had like a difficult delivery with Nicholas in the sense that like I wasn't progressing. And so he was a big baby. I was induced. It was like 36 hours of labor, failed epidurals, and then a C-section. And he was born and he was healthy,
Yeah.
but I instantly was like not healthy. Like I felt very sick from all the medications that were given to
Mm-hmm.
me. I pretty much like had like really like an onset of postpartum
Quick.
very quickly. Like I'd say like the day after I delivered him. Like so I had um like that adrenaline you get after the baby's
Yeah.
delivered,
Yeah.
and then like once that like wore off, um I definitely suffer from postpartum, but I was open about it. I was able to share that I was like feeling that way with my family and with friends. And
Was your sister a big part of that conversation?
yeah, like
'Cause I
my
feel
mother and my sister.
yeah.
I remember being in the hospital still, and like my mother and my sister being there and knowing like I was not myself, like telling friends like
Yeah.
not to come to the hospital to see me because like I was not feeling well. Like I had like so much pain I had 3 failed epidurals.
God almighty.
And you
Yeah.
know, hours of like other fluids being put into my body and like things to try to progress the labor. So I was very swollen. I literally like looked green. Like I was not well.
Yeah.
He was well though.
Yeah.
He was almost 10 pounds and he was like very alert from the beginning and, you know, happy in the hospital. Then we took him home within a few weeks. It was like clearly, I remember being like not nervous to have a baby because I had nannied for several years, like through college, and I had, my sister's older than me and she has twin girls that I was like very hands on with to help her because twins are twins. So
Right,
you
right.
take the help you can get. So I really wasn't nervous to become a mother, and it was everything I always wanted. But I used to say I am scared of having a baby that's colic. And sure enough, like
Aw,
within like
Nicholas.
3 weeks of bringing him home, like it was evident he was colic. Like he cried like mostly throughout the day. A lot, like he had that witching hour that most babies have, but it was like 3 hours, not 1 hour. My sister would come over and she would like walk him around the steps for me, like over and over and over again, like the motion. And then somebody had told me to read like the 5 S's. I forget even. There's like a whole doctor theory behind this, but it did help him actually. It was like soothing, like swaddling is one of them. Shaking, whatever, sound, you know. So I did all those things. I used to stand like in my walk-in closet in the dark, him swaddled, with the air conditioner's noise, you know, and the sound machine, and I'd get him to sleep. Thankfully, he slept. So although he was like colic throughout the day, he did sleep for me at night. So I was like able to be like a sane person. But I was like, wow, he's colic. That was like a big fear of mine. And I don't know if there's I do read some things that there's an association with colicky babies and then autism later. But it was not there in my brain. So then by 4 months, the colic like wore off. Like once Nicholas was able to have like solid food. So I think he had like a digestional thing. I did try like a few different formulas. I didn't breastfeed. Again, partially I think the breastfeeding thing was part of like postpartum. Not I didn't feel like a pressure to breastfeed, although I tried, but like I didn't have this like bond or whatever, like the natural instinct and the patience, because I wasn't feeling myself. But by 4 months, the colic ended, and he was like happy. But I did, he was always very alert, and it wasn't in my like wave of thought yet. Autism.
Yeah.
But just that was like difficult. You know, that period was difficult. So then, for the first, 8 months later of his life, all his milestones were pretty on point. And I wasn't even fixated on milestones. And you would think for like a first time mom, like a lot of them are, but I wasn't. It wasn't even something like I looked at that much. I mean, I did like my pediatrician questionnaires and all of that. But for gross motor skills, Nicholas was like even above the grade. I think like he walked before he was born. And stuff like that. He was very strong, like, so all those like gross motor skills, he was like into using like a fork and a spoon and stuff like that. Not that he was using it independently, but like it wasn't like a struggle. And then just at the year marker, like the words didn't come. And that was like the first I want to say from that point on, my experience with realizing things were different and with realizing that Nicholas was autistic, it was very matter of fact in my own brain and like my whole experience, which is like, I think kind of different. But I am that way. So like the words didn't come, and I think automatically in my brain, automatically went to autism.
Wow.
Yeah. But I kind of pushed it down. Because I was like, am I jumping the gun? Like, I don't want to be an over-aggressive parent, because he's only 12 months old, and he is saying mama, but that was it. And not even all the time. But I remember I went away for one night with my husband at that age range. And I came home, and my sister had watched him at her house, actually. And when I walked into her house, he said, mama, and smiled, and it made me so happy. But, like, in the back of my brain, I knew, like, that's the only word he's using. But he was babbling, and he was making eye contact and all these other things. But he was not gesturing. He was not waving hello or waving goodbye or pointing. And he was not using words, but he was engaging with me, but it was there. It was in my brain, like autism, but I had pushed it down. So at 12 months, like really like even the questionnaire, nothing was flagged, right? Because like his gross motor skills were strong, and that's really what they like ask about really at 12 months.
I will say, like, none of Pierce's pediatrician well visit like questionnaires or developmental check-ins ever got flagged either until later, and language was just the pervasive I'm trying to think back. Like, so it's interesting.
So then at 15 months, like I can remember like it's a video in my brain bringing him to the doctor's office, because I was going to have this discussion now, and the doctor seeing his questionnaire, and like I said it to the doctor, like the doctor's like, any concerns? And I was like, well, he's not like using his words. And the doctor was like, okay, very matter of fact, there it goes again. I didn't have somebody who blew me off or thought like I was being ridiculous. He said, we can contact early intervention. We live in Nassau County. We can contact early intervention, and they'll come in and evaluate your son, and we'll take it from there. Now, this was, I want to say the COVID pandemic hit when Nick was like 6 months old. So this is now like still COVID times, still like people masking and all of those things. So was that contributing to my son's delay? I wasn't bringing him out to like socialize him at like mommy and me's, or even to the grocery store, like where people would wave to my son, because I'm not walking into my house and waving to my son. I'm walking in and hugging him and kissing him, and he would always embrace me that way. So I'm like, even though it's there in my brain, I'm like kind of like, well, making not excuses, but like explanations for why it could be that way, And so my doctor and I, after that 15-month visit, I said, am I being overzealous, or should I wait to 18 months? Because I feel like 18 months is like a big marker when it comes to doctors and stuff like that. So we decided to wait, and at 18 months, nothing much has changed. And I started to notice, although he had always been doing it, I think. Now that I look at pictures and videos.
I like that, like, you're like, I started to notice.
Yes, I started to notice stimming.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be this topic or conversation if I didn't mention stimming, so I want to hear you out and then jump in on that.
So, it wasn't hand flapping, but he would do this thing where he loves TV still, my son. He's very, like, screen. He loves iPad. He loves TV. He loves songs on TV. Like, his favorite thing when he was little was Little Baby Bum. But he likes Daniel Tiger and all those, classic kid things.
Yeah.
Coco Melon and all that stuff. So he would run to the TV that's mounted on the wall, and he would, like, stiffen his arms and, like, kind of, like, bow. Like, almost like he was, like, starting the music.
Can you tell the conductor?
Yes. So my mom used to be like, oh, he's our little maestro. Like, he's like conducting the music that we're listening to. And it was cute, but I was like, no, this is, like, repetitive. Like, it's happening all the time. And it's not, like, a normal movement. But it's also not one that I would be, like a hand flapping or a covering of the ears or something that's more, like, well-known. But I'm like, then I'm, like, Googling and being my own doctor, and I'm like, this is a stim,
Yeah.
So at 18 months, I was able to bring that up to the doctor and the lack of speech, and then we had early intervention come in. But that was a whole process in its own because everything was, like, backed up because of COVID. So, like, although I, like, was filing at 18 months, it took, like, a month for, like, a speech pathologist to come into my house and see him, and then they also send, like, a psychologist to, like, analyze his play, which I wasn't even looking at his play that way. But then once those two evaluations occurred, I was in my head like, he's autistic. I could tell by the way, I mean, they don't give you any information. They, like, watch your child and try to play with them and try to engage them, but I could tell from their reactions that they thought he was too, and then they gave me some tips to, like, work on at home with him, which was really helpful and great on their part, because that's not necessary on their part. But they knew it was going to be, like, some time before I was going to be able to get help in my house for him, because there was a backlog from COVID.
Yeah, and I mean, the timeline is relevant because Pierce is 10 months older than Nicholas, and it was shut down.
Yeah.
Like, and that was part of, I had a pediatrician saying to me, let's wait. Pierce also had quite a few words that he was labeling, and I've come to learn a lot about that, which we'll talk about probably in a different conversation about language and just thought processing. But my pediatrician said to wait. I think largely less to do with Pierce and more to do with the pandemic. Like, there was no EI. It was literally shut down before it even came back to virtual, and that kind of, I felt like it bought me more time to process. I still wasn't, like, in denial early on, because I didn't think anything was like autism still wasn't on my radar, probably because I just didn't know. And in hindsight, it would have been if I knew then what I know now about autism. But I wanted to say, like, when you mentioned stimming, I can't pinpoint, like, an age. It's funny, some things are, like, super vivid for me in this time frame, like the songs and the gesturing. I can't pinpoint when stimming first came onto our horizon. I probably should look back at, like, the thousands of videos that I have. But Pierce does flap his hands. He does less now because it's turning into claps and he's got more spoken language. So he stims a little bit differently now, or a lot differently. But hand flapping, Pierce had some more, I guess, common autism or maybe stereotypical stims, like the hand flapping, some, like, happy noises. So that falls in this conversation for me. Like, when you mention stimming, it definitely feels like something I should talk about if someone has a child who is stimming in a more not traditional, but, like, again, more characteristically autistic way. My son was like that. So that was a sign if something is different. I just didn't know. Like, I didn't know what it meant. I certainly didn't know what it was, and I just thought it was, like, endearingly perfectly Pierce. So it's like, and it is,
and some neurotypical children do stim too, out of excitement and stuff like that, but it's not
as
not the
repetitive.
way Nicholas was stimming.
And
it's like a hand flap and then like a clap and then like a yay for a neurotypical, you know?
In fact, my mom would say, and I
Yeah.
don't think she was trying to talk me out of worry, but she was like, oh, Grandma would take you to the train station when I was commuting home, and I just remember you being a baby in her arms, like flapping out of excitement. So totally. I mean, that's a lot of the things, or I think that that's like sort of this recurring idea with autism is like, when is something that is typical not typical because of like frequency or repetitiveness, or it's like
actually frustrating as a parent, that part of it,
because it's kind of gray.
It gets more frustrating the older they get, because like certain things, like people just want to blame it on autism, but like why is this autism with my son when like a neurotypical child could be doing the same thing, like picky eating. Like I know there's severe cases of like people that only eat like eating 3 things, you know what I mean? And I get that, and it's a struggle. But like always his diet's asked about now, and like he eats, protein, fruit, some vegetables, like, but I would still consider him a picky eater. Yeah. Like he's not eating everything I give to him. He doesn't like pizza. Like what kid doesn't like pizza, you know? Right. But on the grand scheme of things, like he eats more than like my 13-year-old neurotypical nieces. You know what I mean? Like, so some things like that are frustrating for parents like us, I feel. And that's just one example, eating, but it's across the board. Like
I totally agree.
Just all the things that kids are expected to do, like it always just goes back to autism. But like some things can be like a personality thing, or
in fact, I think so many things can be. I mean, to me, this feels like a conversation that not only is coming, but that we're gonna have over time, like multiple times, because once your child, I'm in the son mode, but once your child receives an autism diagnosis, it's like nearly impossible to take that lens off, right? And it's not only you looking at your child, and I only mean that like when it comes to not the day-to-day fun and play, but I just mean in general when you're talking to teachers or therapists, or you're looking through those lenses a lot, and it's hard to know what standards like are just being a kid, like what things fall under just being a kid. But so stimming, language. In fact, I like, for me, after that point of like 18 to 20 months, it really was the language, and and it was hard to actually figure out, but because Pierce was labeling and had like a pretty good word count, it never really caught my attention. It was more at the age probably closer to 2 for us with language, where he wasn't combining words. So like, he could say more, he could say bubbles, but he wasn't saying more bubbles. I've come to learn so much about why that was happening and how Pierce acquires language. But on topic for this particular episode, something's different. 100% language, stimming. But like, I look back, it's so hard to, especially like when you are deeply connected to your child, and like I know even still to this day, like Pierce gives me more and different than he does in other settings, and with other people. So
and so like going back to that age range of like evaluations and where you said speech and stimming, and then I could also add to it, once I had him evaluated, I realized play. But I didn't know that until he was evaluated. And now that I have another child, I even see more because I'm so well aware now. So he wasn't playing appropriately with things. Like at 18 months, they were like, oh, he should be able to do a 3-piece puzzle, like a triangle, circle, square. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that, So he was able to learn, but I really had to teach him. And I didn't know that wasn't the way it was. And now I do, because I have another child, and like I could just be playing with Nicholas and he just picks up on the play. It's not like I actually have to really show him how to do all the things, like push a car or put it down the ramp. Like he mimics us, and like he does it naturally, and like those things didn't naturally happen for Nick, but I didn't know to be looking for that until I had like a professional's opinion. So those 3 things, speech, stimming, and play, really like made me realize that my son's probably autistic, although he didn't receive a diagnosis until a little after 2. And so I had a few different professionals that worked with him before that through early intervention. And they were even on the cusp because he was able to learn and retain, and he was young, so it's still like difficult. Like, well, what do you think? I had one of the people working with him asked me, and I said, some days I think he is autistic and other days I'm not sure. And they said, I feel the same way, because like he would still make eye contact then. He was very good at it. His lack of eye contact came as he became more self-aware of himself and his situations and more uncomfortable. And so the eye contact has decreasingly gotten worse for him. But I understand why, because he feels uncomfortable in a situation, or he's just more self-aware, So I started to see that slip away. So my experience with Nicholas was that he was always delayed. I didn't have one of those experiences where like he had words and then one day he just wasn't using them, which is the experience for some people. But I could say, this is the way I shared to you and to Heather right now is very matter of fact. But obviously I was, and I said that from the beginning, like I thought it in my head. The doctor was very matter of fact. And we just went through the whole process, and I could literally explain that was my experience. But internally, it was not that way.
I was going to actually ask about your internal experience.
And so, there's a lot of struggles that you go through. Like, so we're all just coming out of like a pandemic and feeling isolated on its own because of that. And then like I had this feeling of, and I was finally over postpartum. Then the pandemic hit. And now I'm thinking that my son's autistic and he's not playing like the way like he should be playing. And I felt really isolated in it. At this point in his upbringing, I thought I would have like a mommy and me group and like mommy friends, and like Nick would have little friends, and like none of that was happening. And like I felt like sad and disappointed inside that what I envisioned would be wasn't happening. I tried to sign Nick up. And at this point, I wasn't sure that he was autistic, and I didn't have a diagnosis. I tried to sign him up for like a regular twos program, and like he went to the first day of the twos, and he went in and he did good for the first day, but it was the first day, like, and then after that, it was like driving down the block, he would like start screaming. After like 3 or 4 sessions, like the teacher was like, maybe we should switch him to a smaller class, but I was like, no, I don't think he's ready, and I knew they weren't equipped for him, and I was right. So I winded up doing a mommy and me with him that year instead of like a drop-off twos, which was a really positive experience actually. It was in a regular nursery school, but they were very inclusive. I shared with them like my whole experience that I was going through with that year, of all of his evaluations and his diagnosis, all those things. Like I was there, and I shared with those moms and with the staff there, and they were very loving and welcoming. And it just was like a really comfortable environment. I never, even though Nick wasn't getting up and singing the songs in circle time, like they never made me feel different or weird to be there with him. Like they accepted him for who he was. And so kudos to that place that we were at. And they'll always have like a little special place in my heart because of that. And I'm really like, my journey of embracing Nicholas for who he was started there. That was my first like real public thing I participated in with him. And I really saw firsthand his differences from other kids, like his peers, but I guess in hindsight, and I'm just saying this out loud for the first time, it was really great that I had that, because it gave me this like real like pride in Nicholas, and also like I could do this. Like I can do this. Like we could do this, and people will accept him and love him and embrace him. And those are like the fears you have. Like, will people love my child because he isn't like every other child? Will people embrace him? But I had that from like a very early on experience with him, so I feel really lucky for that. But still, I had like, resentment and anger. I would go to like a family party, and like he wouldn't play the way I wish he would play with like cousins, all those things, like, and it was all internal. Like, my husband is different from me. Like, Nicholas's autism was just like, he was just able to easily embrace it and accept it, and like accept Nick for everything that he is. And that's really beautiful, and I'm really lucky that he is that way.
Yeah.
And he's lucky that he is that way. For me, it was, I of course accepted my son, and I love him to like the end of the earth, but it was still hard to just accept our situation. Like, is this really like my life?
Yeah.
Like, I would go to sleep and I would cry alone. I would, not that I would be scared to share with my husband, but like, it was something deeply personal, because I was the only one really going through that. I would cry alone. I would pray so much. I would like, and I still pray, of course, but my prayer is different because I understand, and and I've come to a better place of acceptance with it all. But it was a very isolating time, and that's where we bring it back to like the spectrum that connects us. It doesn't have to be like, I've learned and I've met some of like the most wonderful people because of my son Nicholas, and I hope I continue to,
I have a feeling we will.
Yeah. So, the beginning is really hard, but the best thing you could do, and I'm not an expert, but the best thing you could do is just get what your child needs for them. Whatever it is that you think it is, like in your mom gut, whatever you think might help them work for them, the earlier the better. That advice is one that everybody could take. Because I know everybody thinks like different things, like, and everybody has a right to, like diet or OT, PT, speech, all the things,
Just meeting your kid where he or she is at.
Like, whatever you think's gonna work, you try it, you give it a try, and you give it a whirl, and the earlier the better, even though it's hard to accept it early on because they are so little.
I mean, I think for me, like, to build on that, when I look back at the mom that I was, our happiest moments were when I was fully present, like when I was out of my head. So absolutely have faith that when you express your gut feelings or worries, that you will meet people who will help you. Maybe it won't be your pediatrician, maybe it will, maybe it won't be a friend, maybe it will, maybe it'll be a nursery school teacher. You're going to find someone who's going to help you open the door to the process, to evaluations, to services. So I think building on that, for me, when I look back at this time of Something's Different, my happiest moments, our happiest moments, were when I was present and we were just fully in it together. I remember actually someone who is a dear friend of mine who is also a nursery school director. I remember she said to me before any of Pierce's evaluations, because Pierce was also in a general ed community-based TWOS program. It was a Mommy and Me transition class. And that was, I mean, I would be remiss not to mention that experience and the love that we received, but also the uncertainty and the overwhelm that I was going through under this umbrella of Something is Different and noticing the differences. But I remember the director of the nursery school said to me, no matter what happens with any evaluation or any data or anything, like, Pierce is always just going to be Pierce, and nothing changes him. Like, you're just learning. And when I was able to be present, and I was present a lot, but I was also stuck in my head a lot. When I was present, that was like our happiest time. So I would say, yes, like, reach out, connect with people that can help you start the process of learning more about where your child is at and their needs, and then also find ways. Like, for me, meditation was a big thing, to be present. And it's I wrote down a note too about play. I don't even want to like go down that path again, because it's probably going to be like a separate conversation or multiple conversations, because there's still so little, and play is at the center of therapy and what they're doing now. But it took me time, because Pierce also didn't play in a really typical way. I would say, like, building off of my first comments with like the engaging gesture-based songs, parallel to that was that he wasn't playing the same way that my daughter had played early on, and that was definitely contributing to my understanding that something was different. But when I met him where he was, so like when you're in school and when you're in therapy, play looks a certain way because there are goals attached to it. When I met Pierce where he was in with the play that resonated with him, that was also like magic for us because I didn't know what was going on, but like if he wanted to flip the pages of his book a certain way and like that was playful for him, when we did that, it was like connection and reassurance. Like so I think just building on getting your kid evaluated and exploring services, I would say be present and like meet them where they're at, because no evaluation's ever going to change who your kid is. Like
when Heather mentioned being present, it reminded me of something that I used to do all the time. And I said I used to pray all the time. But one thing every morning before I would open my eyes, but I would be awake at this time in my life, I would pray for patience, to be present, and to be positive. And I called it the 3 P's in my brain. Every day I would pray for the 3 P's: patient, present, and positive. And I'd start my day out like that.
Yeah.
And it was a good place to be mentally, you know, with what we were going through, everybody.
I feel like we've got to share that.
Yeah.
That's got to maybe go on our Instagram.
So
or
you reminded me of that when you brought up present. Like I haven't been praying that way because like we're in a different place. Yeah. But I needed that. I needed that reminder every morning to be that way for my child and to be that way for myself.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's a whole separate conversation. Yeah. But like, as we end this conversation, as much as this is Pierce's autism journey, every time we talk and connect like this, it makes me realize that it is arguably more the story of a mom, of moms, right? Like, of figuring out like our purpose, who and what's important to us. I just like how things change and evolve, whether it's like your faith in this case or, you know, the supports that you need. Like, and when you say, I pray for me too, like, oh my God, it's easy to forget about yourself when you're all in with your kid.
So, we're about to wrap it up, I think, for this episode, but we want to do a little something where we kind of try to end every episode on a high note, because some of the topics we're going to talk about are definitely going to be deep and, you know, heavy. Since Heather and I like formed this friendship, we'll like send each other like little nice, like little stories about our own kids or like things we see on social media, and she'll be like, look, it's a little glimmer, like a little glimmer. And we love that. Like, we love sharing glimmers with each other, especially of that. Like, I love hearing like a little Pierce glimmer.
And Nicholas, yes.
It like, really like just it's uplifting, and I love to see them from other like autism parents on social media. Like, I literally like
so energizing.
Yeah, I share every single one with Heather and other friends too. So we're gonna try to end every episode on a little like glimmer note. So I tried to think back of a glimmer like from that time period, when we were going through like Nicholas's like early intervention and diagnosis. And like one thing that I like think is a glimmer about Nicholas and that I love immensely is the way he hugs people that he loves. And it's been that way since he's like 15 or 18 months. Like, he fiercely, and especially me, he will hug me like no other. Like, and it has not changed. He's almost 5 years old and he still hugs me till this day. Like nobody has ever hugged me in my life. And, you know, a glimmer of this is that he may hug me like that for the rest of my life, because he may never like go through that embarrassing phase of like, I don't want to hug my mom.
Too cool for you, Mom.
But, you know, I'll take them while I get them now. And if I get them forever, that will be lovely. But he doesn't even know his strength. And that's where the hug comes from. But it is fierce, and anybody who gets to experience it is lucky. So that's my little glimmer. Yeah.
When Fallon and I talked about ending our conversations by sharing a glimmer and trying to think about one that was relevant to the topic, it really is like full circle for me. When I think back to that time, there was one night I was putting Pierce to sleep, and we were singing, which is something we do all the time, all day, and especially at night. And I have really come to learn about my freestyle talents. We were singing, we happened to be singing that song like Open Shut Them, and I vividly can see him. It was dark in his bedroom. We had a nightlight on, and I just desperately needed from him to engage with me, and and he did. And I wasn't like I was testing him or needed to know that he could. It was more just like, come on, baby. He was little, maybe like 15 months old, and he did open shut them. He was laying on his back, and we were singing together, and I was looking at him over him, and he did the hand gesture, and it was just like more that he could physically do it, and or less that he could physically do it, and more that he knew I needed him to do it. Mm-hmm. Like I just needed to know that we were as connected as I believed we were, and he did it, and that was such a glimmer that carried me through this day as like a highlight. So that feels right to share today.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, I hope that everybody enjoyed this topic. I mean, I'm sure we'll delve back to like this time many times while we discuss many other things. But, remember that you're not in it alone. It's important to try to make connections, and that's why we're here. We want anybody who wants to listen to know that you're not going through this alone.
Yeah. And we want to hear your stories too. I think the more stories that we can put a spotlight on, whether it's on Instagram, YouTube,
right now
emailing us.
Yeah, right now you could follow us on our Instagram, The Spectrum That Connects Us, or we also have a Gmail, The Spectrum That Connects Us @gmail.com. But go ahead, you want to share a story with us, please do so. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us.